All right. Good morning, everybody. It is the second day of July, 2025. Welcome to Breaking Health Barriers with me, Dr. Jack Stockwell. This is our health show in its 31st year, mind you, at K-Talk Radio, and just getting started on the stream. Constantly trying to make improvements to the stream broadcast all the time. Little clicks, little clicks here and there to try to do a much more professional program, and my promise of producing a lot of shorts is just around the corner. I've got several topics to cover today, but the most important thing that I wanted to announce this morning, that I said yesterday that I would tell you, and this is for the K-Talk audience, and I'll announce this a couple of times throughout the program. Ever since I first started with K. Henry back in March of 1995, 30 years ago, K-Talk has been a very big part of the building of my practice. When she got on the air that very first day together with me and talked about how her breathing greatly improved after one correction to the top bone in the neck, I have never been wanting for patients. I have seen between the K-Talk audience who have come to see me and the referrals that came from them, I have seen nearly 22,000 people since I started 30 years ago at K-Talk. And I am deeply appreciative of that. And so I have an offer for you. I have been described at times as being expensive. Well, I figured what I do should be worth the cost of good dental work, especially with a root canal. Some people say, well, how do you figure what you're going to charge? I adjust, the work I do changes a position of 24 bones. A root canal is just one bone. I know that maybe it's being kind of silly, but in the long run, I'm probably the least expensive out there because you do not need to see me very much. There are others who charge less up front than I do, but you're going to see them a lot. And in the long run, you're going to spend a lot more money. So I've got this thank you that I want to offer to and I'm only offering it to the K-Talk audience. During the entire month of July, I'm cutting my initial fees in half, 50% off, during the month of July as a thank you to K-Talk for having helped build my practice. That'll run till the end of July. Half off. Now, in the wintertime, around Christmas, we always would do the 2-for-1. This is better than that because you don't have to bring in two people for the charge of one. Here, you can come by yourself. And I am cutting my initial fee in half, 50% off, during the month of July as a thank you and a part of the celebration as we move into the 250th year of our republic. So you would have to call the office to make an appointment. The office isn't open yet. 801-523-1890. And I will take care of you just as fast as we can get you scheduled. And I guarantee you will be happy. As I think back over the last 25, 30 people that I've seen, brand new patients, there was one who wasn't completely happy with me, but I didn't get a chance to finish. They were expecting a Jesus-type restoration within 1 or 2 visits, and this person has had massive accidents to the spine and the head since childhood. And I told him it's going to take, I told him right up front, looking at his x-rays, looking at his history, it's going to take me a while to fix this because I'm not Jesus. So of the other 95% of them, all got results that they were looking for. In fact, they got more than what they were looking for because of the power of the upper cervical correction, meaning putting that top bone back in its proper position. And you know it's in its proper position because the shoulders will be level, the hips will be level. There will be no twisting of the hips or twisting of the chest. You will stand as Mother Nature designed for you to stand, with your head back over your pelvis and your spine straight. If those things are not present, then that top bone is not in the correct position. So throughout the month of July to July 31st, I'm offering half off, and I'm only offering this to the K-Talk audience. Other people who get referred in who do not subscribe to K-Talk or are familiar with my radio programs, I'm not offering them this discount, only you. Now, we have a July 4th sale coming up this weekend for all of our supplements, including the ones that we've created. And you can order online for this sale. No code is needed. The code will automatically be applied at checkout, 15% code, a 15% discount. So I will announce this a couple of times during the program. And then one particular thing I wanted to point out was the amount of vertigo and dizziness that I've been seeing. I don't know where this is coming from, but a lot of it. And I can honestly say every single person that I have seen for vertigo or dizziness in the last 2-3 weeks, now let me say the last 2 months, and I'm talking probably half a dozen people, every one of them got positive results. And again, it's the vertigo dizziness is 9 times out of 10. It's nothing to do with the inner ear mechanism, which is why the Epley procedure didn't help them any. It's the way the head's sitting on the neck and that imbalance that the body is trying to deal with, and it will manifest as vertigo or dizziness. All right, so I want to get on with the program here. And what I have for you, I was asked a question yesterday regarding acid alkaline balance in the body. This fellow who I've been taking care of since he was a child, he now has teenagers, just stuck his head in my office as he was leaving and said, "Hey, can I ask you a quick question?" Of course you can. He said, "My mother-in-law is really pushing taking baking soda every day so that she can make her body alkaline." I don't know how many times I've heard this. I have a podcast at ForbiddenDoctor.com on the fraud of alkalinity. I mean, this is just, it's just nuts. And the idea that the body's supposed to be alkaline. And my standard answer to that is, if you believe the body is supposed to be alkaline, you might also believe the body should always be facing the North Pole, because that makes about as much sense. So I tried to explain to him there are these ridiculous fads that keep showing up in nutrition all the time. The fad of antioxidants, the fad of the MTHFR gene problem. And the one thing I would say about that is if you can't methylate, you wouldn't be alive. But that's a subject for another program. So back to the acid alkaline, I said, your saliva should be slightly alkaline. It can go acidic depending on what you just ate, but it should be slightly alkaline. When by the time you've finished your meal, and over the next hour, your stomach should be as hot as battery acid. If it's alkaline, you're not going to digest anything. Once it gets through the pyloric valve and into the small intestine, it should be highly alkaline to neutralize the acid coming out of the stomach. And the alkalinity decreases as it moves through the small intestine and into the colon. The last area of the colon should be very acidic, which protects you from bacteria entering in through the bottom door. So I said it depends on what part of the body you're talking about. Your bloodstream should be just slightly alkaline. Your urine should be very acidic. And so the body works on balancing these things all the time. But to just make a blanket statement the body should be alkaline is a fraud, and it's dangerous to try to force your body into alkalinity because acidosis can result. All right. Now, I need to talk about salt. This is another question that I'm asked all the time. Sodium chloride, table salt, is an essential constituent of the body fluids. You can't eliminate water by osmotic transfer. You can't perspire. Your kidneys cannot eliminate waste materials and poisons without the help of salt. So it seems very odd that occasions should arise where salt should be restricted, as in some cardiovascular disease cases. There are studies that show, reliable studies from years, decades ago, that eliminating salt from your diet affects 1% of heart problems. It will create all kinds of problems in 100% of people who restrict their salt intake. Now, the answer to this question seems to be in the fact that there has to be this normal balance between sodium and potassium salts in the body fluids, things we call electrolytes. In fact, the testing of the mineral requirements of living cells, it was found that a deficiency of potassium was present, and too much sodium caused a limitation in growth, and that increasing the potassium permitted the tolerance of this sodium. Now, I'm just mentioning this because these two work hand in hand. The potassium salt seemed to be the essential one. Potassium, not sodium, being necessary to plant life. So the sodium was only detrimental, too much of it, by reason of a deficiency of potassium, by reason of a deficiency of eating potassium-rich vegetables. Now, in human nutrition, potassium is more critical than sodium by reason of the radioactivity of potassium. I don't know if you know that or not, but food-based potassium is radioactive. And the reasoning is the radioactivity of potassium appears to have a function of supplying electronic energy to activate the timing mechanism of the heart. Now, in potassium deficiency, the heart becomes erratic in its pulsations, and the administration of other salts with equivalent radioactivity relieves the situation. Studies have been done on rubidium. Who's heard of rubidium, let alone your RDA? There is no RDA for it. But it was one element that could be substituted for potassium. Not that you'd necessarily want to do that, but there may be somebody who's got a problem metabolizing potassium, so we're going to give you a little rubidium, another radioactive mineral. Now, we tend to have potassium deficiencies, and probably one of the most obvious outward signs of a potassium deficiency is tachycardia. Your heart beating too fast, a heartbeat over 90. One of the first things I would look into is perhaps the possibility of a potassium deficiency. Now, we have a lot of potassium deficiency in this country by reason of the depletion in our soils of this element, and by reason of the fact that the cheaper price of sodium salts has caused their substitution in many foods and drugs where potassium was formerly used. Potassium chloride is salty. Whoops. I need to blank out the K-Talk crowd for a second. Sodium becomes very important for the person who lives on a low-protein vegetarian diet, since the urea, the carbamide, formed in your tissues from the metabolism of protein, can take the place of sodium chloride in promoting the osmotic transfer in the kidney and the sweat glands that otherwise would require salt. Now, the Eskimo has been cited to demonstrate the case of human nutritional patterns in which salt is not normally included, because the Eskimo has no need for salt, interestingly enough, and so he does not crave salt. Neither can he tolerate hot weather. So his thyroid gland cannot adapt itself to a hot climate, and he dies if he's taken to places where the weather remains long at levels near the temperature of blood. These studies were done years and years ago. Just an incredibly odd relationship between the Eskimo and salt. And so, which is one of the reasons why it is believed that those living in such harshly cold temperatures never migrated south. Because when they got into temperatures that equaled the temperature of their blood, they couldn't survive. Because they didn't have any salt. Now, those of us who eat less meat than the Eskimo will find that we must have sodium chloride, and often we may find that some carbamide too is beneficial, especially in hot weather, to promote toxic elimination. Now, no, there's still something at K-Talk. Carbamide, I have carbamide in the office, AC carbamide. It was used as a diuretic before Lasix and other types of diuretics showed up to chemically force the kidney to lose fluid. Up until that time, carbamide was used. And because it's healthy, it doesn't have any side effects, and it comes from plants, that was the material of use as a diuretic. And then, of course, comes the chemical ones that do have serious side effects. Now, an interesting thing I ran across is that nightmare-type dreams are one indication of poor elimination of the toxins that require carbamide to get these toxins out of the system that affect the brain in sleep. And so is any irritating influence in the bladder or urinary tract. So a concentration of toxic material that can build up in the urine by reason of a lack of carbamide or just basic urea will of necessity cause irritation in the bladder and in the urethra. And quite often, a UTI, especially with a female, is misdiagnosed over and over again. That it's not a buildup of bacteria in the bladder. It's a buildup of alkaline material and toxic agents that haven't had a chance to get out of the body yet, largely due to dehydration. Now, morphine and most pain-relieving drugs inhibit the formation of carbamide in the tissues, and it aggravates the mental reactions in some cases to the point of delirium. And they inhibit elimination of toxic products by the kidney. And carbamide should always be administered. Should always be. AC carbamide that we have in the office should always be taken along with drugs. Because many of the drugs are toxic. Even aspirin is toxic. Anything, and I can't prove this, but this is based on my experience. Anything you take inside the body that Mother Nature didn't make is toxic to some degree or another. It's toxic to life. And so anytime we're taking substances like that, we need to make sure the kidney has what it needs to detoxify the blood. Or these toxins build up, and they end up in the joints. They end up in the fat tissues. They end up in the breast. They end up in your belly. They end up in the fat along the thighs, and then it starts looking a little crinkly, and you know what I'm talking about. So this present custom of restricting salt for patients who have cardiovascular disease is a very ill-advised substitute for balancing the potassium-sodium intake. And a deficiency of potassium may be the primary cause of the very reason in which a cardiologist will restrict salt in your diet. and the cardiologist having no training in nutrition. I mean, you might as well be discussing what is hidden on the dark side of the moon with them as to discuss nutritional concepts and the sodium-potassium balance and how to put the sodium in proper numbers in the body by improving potassium intake. Because often, potassium is the real remedy. Now, in potassium deficiencies, there's more or less a complete inhibition of adrenal function. And the adrenals have everything to do with handling stress, as well as several other functions. Now, every disease for which cortisone is being used is basically a deficiency disease stemming from potassium lack to some degree or another. And to restrict the intake of salt to treat a disease is obviously the wrong approach when the problem is malnutrition of a particular mineral. And where the adrenal glands have been damaged by infection, extra sodium chloride is necessary to save the life of the patient, because they'll die without a lot of salt. And how do we know they need it? Because they crave it. They're craving salt. I was watching this video the other day. I thought it was fascinating because I watch videos representative of life in the far north, because it amazes me that there are cultures living north and thriving north of the Arctic Circle. Hundreds of thousands of people around the globe, Eastern, Western Hemisphere, hundreds of thousands of them. And I kind of, why would you live there? By the same token, why would anybody live in Phoenix, Arizona? I mean, I lived in Phoenix for 2 years. My goodness, that heat. Now, Phoenix was a small little village up until about the end of World War II when air conditioning was discovered, or at least advanced to the point where it could be in people's homes. And then, of course, Phoenix exploded. It has an awful lot to do with the snowbirds in the wintertime, but then it became a thriving year-round population group because of air conditioning. But as I said, I lived there for 2 years back in the 80s. No, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to Phoenix any more than Ripley is going to go back to LV 246. Some of you know what that means. Unless it's January or February, I'll do that. Now, I have been north of the Arctic Circle once at Kotzebue in my mining days in Alaska. I once took a flight from Anchorage to Nome, but it went up to Kotzebue first, and Kotzebue is just above the Arctic Circle. And a very interesting group of people, and I was there for a little bit, very interesting climate and temperatures. And it was in the second week of June, approaching the solstice, and there was no night. At nighttime, the sun dips below the horizon for about an hour, hour and a half. So there's no darkness at all. And so I know a little bit of what it feels like there, but not to live there. Now, I brought all this up because I'm talking about salt and potassium. And an interesting thing is, for reindeer that are herded by a lot of these nomadic tribes living north of the Arctic Circle, their reindeer they're like dogs. They're all over the place. They want to be petted. They want to be nuzzled, until, of course, the time comes that they're going to be eaten. But in a nomadic village of, say, 100, which includes men, women, and children, there could be another 100 or 200 reindeer. And as you have probably awakened at 3 o'clock in the morning, unable to go back to sleep, wondering how people who are wrapped up in reindeer skins and seal skins 90% of their life can go to the bathroom when it's freezing outside. And So this one video I was watching addressed that thing, and because there is no salt for the reindeer, and the nomadic tribes do not provide them with salt, whenever these nomadic people will urinate into the snow before the ladies can stand up and pull up their pants, or the men can close their fly, the reindeer are eating up all the yellow snow as fast as possible. Why? Because it's full of salt. And when I discovered that, I thought, wow, that is so fascinating that they will consume human urine to get the salt. So they have a common area for colon waste. But when it comes to urinary waste, all they look for is just a small moment of privacy. And then they can pee anywhere they want, because before they get through peeing, as the reindeer are nuzzling their heads all around the backside, the yellow snow's gone. Now, I don't know if that's because I'm weird. I just found that incredibly fascinating, because the reindeer need salt, and there is no salt in their diet. So they'll go to that extent to get it. Now, we need salt for a number of reasons in human physiology, not the least of which is the formation of stomach acids. The chloride that comes out of sodium chloride, as soon as, if you take a teaspoon of table salt and put it in a glass of warm water, it dissolves right away. And so you have chloride ions and you have sodium ions. And when you drink it into your body, not necessarily salt water, although a quarter teaspoon of salt every day of sea salt can be very beneficial. But I don't have time to go into that today. It immediately dissolves into sodium ions and chloride ions, and your body, your stomach wall, because it pumps out these hydrogen protons, will combine with the chloride ion and form hydrochloric acid, which is why people who foolishly follow low-sodium diets have a very hard time digesting proteins, because they don't make hydrochloric acid. Now, potassium often acts as it specifically related to adrenal hormones anytime there's any kind of adrenal insufficiency, and that can cover a plethora of symptoms. But the kind of just the total lack of energy that someone who's suffering from adrenal insufficiency, amazingly, if they're craving salt, and a lot of adrenal insufficiency people will crave salt to the point where they'll just eat one bag of potato chips after another. Once they're given potassium, and one of the best sources of potassium is the green leafy vegetables that came from an organic source, or at least came from a farm that has soil, not a commercial farm that has no soil. Those green leafy vegetables are fed potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus, which makes vegetables look really good. They're just empty of nutrition when it comes from a commercial source. But the organic stuff, especially organic green leafy vegetables, loaded in potassium, energy levels in as little as 7 to 14 days can rebound wonderfully by just consuming organic green leafy vegetables. And don't overcook them. The more you cook these things, if you do in fact cook them outside of a salad, just cook them lightly till they soften up, because the more you cook them, the more you cook the mineral out of it. Unless you're going to then use the water from cooking these vegetables as a base for soup, then you can keep it, or keep it in the system. So it's apparent that sodium and potassium are partners. And you don't want to get them out of balance with one another, because a lot of symptoms will show up for which you'll end up being prescribed drugs. And that's not necessarily the best thing. All right, now another subject. What time is it? 36 minutes after the hour. Now, I want to talk about NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, the over-the-counter pain drugs. What you're not being told is something to consider deeply about this. One of my nutrition teachers, Dustin Strong, presented a seminar here recently in Salt Lake that I attended, Trudy attended, and he usually has a lot of good points. And sometimes, when you hear somebody talking to you about, like the subjects I'm talking about, where we try to bring a lot of different points all together into one focus in a short amount of time, suddenly things start falling into place. Oh, yeah. Oh, I forgot that. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. This kind of a thing. Well, I was reading a publication of his where he's talking about the tendency that we have to reach for a painkiller every time you have a headache. And whenever I'm consulting with a new patient with headaches, and interestingly enough, the headache migraine patterns are really easy to fix. There's one lady that I take care of. She's in her 70s. She works out in the gym every day. And she came in with some pretty bad headaches. And it took me a little longer than most people to get things to settle down because of her neck was like, to feel her neck was like feeling a fence post. Those muscles were so tight. But she responded really well with the upper cervical correction. Oddly enough, the thing that causes headaches and migraine patterns is the same thing that causes sciatica. All three of those things probably make up, at least 25% of the people I see in my clinic. And it's just so easy to fix those things just by putting the spine back into balance. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is a lot of times before the pain gets bad enough that they finally want to come and see me, they try to deal with the NSAIDs, especially naproxen. And so every time their head would hurt, they'd reach for some painkiller. But and it would work, which is why they would continue to do it. They would take the migraine Estrogen or the Tylenol or ibuprofen or whatever else, or mixtures of these two drugs. That would be a quick fix for their pain. If I fix the problem, then they don't have to keep doing this. But until I fix the problem, they have to keep taking these over-the-counter drugs. Well, what if you were to discover that this is putting your heart, your brain, and your kidneys at risk, the constant use of these NSAIDs? Now, some very interesting research, powerful research, that has recently come out. It's in the British Journal of General Practice, and it's the danger of NSAIDs. And I want to point out here that they're saying that preventable adverse drug reactions are responsible for 10% of hospital admissions in older people at a cost of £800 million annually through the National Health Service of the UK. And of course, that's just the UK. That's not even touching what's happening here in this country. Now, I want to repeat those numbers because I went through that pretty fast. But in the British Journal of General Practice, it said, talking about the dangers of NSAIDs, that they're saying that the preventable adverse drug reactions, the ADRs, which makes up a large number of people who rush off to the emergency room, not even considering the fact that the 20 Tylenols or the 20 ibuprofens or the 20 naproxens or the 20 aspirins that they took in the last 24 to 48 hours is what's causing the problem. Because not always when you go to the emergency room for an emergency, do they always ask, have you been taking a bunch of NSAIDs the last 48 hours? They want to know what drugs you're on, but you don't think of those things as drugs sometimes. Or if you do, you don't give it a lot of relevance because it wasn't prescribed. And if it wasn't prescribed, maybe it doesn't have that bad of a side effect list. So you don't really consider it, how dangerous these things are. So what this study showed, that 10% of hospital admissions, 1 out of 10 people who were not just visited the ER, but ended up getting admitted into the hospital, 10% of them, and the care that was rendered at the cost of the government, of course, because these are universal health care countries, 800 million pounds. So you figure that would be a little over $1 trillion in dollars in the UK. And UK has what, like 60 million people? Or I know Germany's about 80 million, and I know England is less than that. But that's just the UK. That's not even touching what's happening here in this country. Now, these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, the naproxen, aspirin, those type of headache medications, are responsible in this country for 30% of hospital admissions for adverse drug reactions, mainly due to bleeding and heart attack and stroke and kidney damage. So the overuse of these drugs leading to these problems in an emergency room setting is not so much the finger pointing at the use of these drugs as to the damage that they've caused. So now you are a hemorrhaging patient. You're now a heart attack patient. You're now a stroke patient. You're now a kidney damage patient. And these problems have to be taken care of because they're much more serious than the pain you were taking the NSAIDs for in the first place, the headache, the backache, whatever. You follow me on this? In fact, what I really want to point out here is it says in this study in the British Journal that from the first day of use, all NSAIDs increase the risk of GI bleeding, heart attack, and stroke from the first day of use. Now, the increased risk is low, but the risk is there. And then the more you use it, then the longer you use it, the greater the risk comes along to cause a heart attack. And so how many people do you know that's had a heart attack, whether they survived or didn't, were taking NSAIDs prior to the heart attack? Because we don't look at that. NSAIDs, buy over the counter. You don't need a prescription. You got an ache, a belly ache, a headache, a neck ache, a backache, a shoulder ache, arthritis aches and pains, joint pains. And a lot of us just reach for these things without thinking. From day one, they are contributing to bleeding in the gastrointestinal tract, heart attack, and stroke. So if you want longevity, as most of us do, you want to have to start thinking about removing the noxious things in our lives from the equation. And so the best thing I can offer is, if you're reaching for some kind of pain relief, is to pay attention where you're feeling the headache in your head. 95% of all headaches are not caused by a lack of NSAIDs in the bloodstream. They start in the neck, and there's tightness in the neck. You can have tightness in the neck without headaches, but eventually it catches up. And the tightness in the neck moves up into the head. It comes up over the top of the head to the forehead, behind the eyes. It'll go along the sides of the head, what they call a temple headache, where the pain is felt anywhere, like if you were wearing a tight toboggan cap. Wherever that is pressing against the brain or the head, you'll often feel headache pain. Now, my experience is this. 95% of all headaches for which we take NSAIDs come from the neck. And the neck stiffness and the neck tightness and pain is because the head is tipped on top of the neck. And the neck muscles tighten up, trying to instinctively pull the head back vertical, or to somehow move the head and neck into a more balanced position to relax those muscles that are trapping the nerves that are constantly causing an inflammatory response against those nerves that come out of the top of the neck and pass up over the whole head like a toboggan cap. And wherever those nerves go that are being inflamed because of the misalignment of the neck is where you're going to feel the headache pain. And then about 5% of headaches, in my experience, is an emotional imbalance type of problem. And I don't mean emotional, I mean endocrine, an endocrine issue, especially female. And it can still be taken care of. It just isn't that hard. So I hope this is coming across, coming to bear and helping you understand that when you feel pain, your body is trying to communicate with you. And it's not saying, give me more Tylenol, give me more ibuprofen, give me more Midol, give me more aspirin. That's how we interpret it because we are oriented towards a quick fix. When in fact, in this study that was in the British Journal of General Practice, from day one, bleeding in the intestinal tract, the increased risk of heart attack as well as stroke takes place with the use of these drugs. And you know, who would have thought? Who would have thought because of the ubiquitous presence and use of these drugs, because they don't require a prescription. So a lot of times when a very serious headache pattern starts to show up, rather than running off to the doctor, especially guys, they'll start reaching for these drugs. And I know that because that's what comes out in the consultation. How long have you been taking Advil? Oh, years. And the wife or the husband who's with them at the time will say, honey, it's like decades. And I can only imagine what other kinds of problems are going on inside the body because of internal GI bleeding, as well as increased risks of heart attack and stroke. So when you consider heart attacks being the greatest leading cause of death in America, and cancer's next, but stroke is right behind it, how many of those heart attacks and strokes are being caused by the overuse of NSAIDs? I haven't seen one death certificate that said that. I've seen a coronary thrombosis, heart attack, cerebral stroke, whatever else, but I've never seen an overuse of NSAIDs. And I don't think you ever will because they're not looking for that. That simply doesn't show up on their radar screen. All right, I hope that helps. Again, I'm going to promote myself as a destroyer of headaches. And if you're just tuning in, I made an announcement at the beginning of the show that through the month of July, in thankfulness for the K-Talk audience that has built my practice over the years, I am cutting my initial fee by 50% through the month of July. I've often been accused of being too expensive. A lot of people shop for health by money, not by quality. And they may find two people, one person who has the reputation for getting rid of something like headaches, and somebody else who claims, oh, I do what he does, when in fact they don't. But because they're cheaper, they will go for the cheaper amount. And sometimes they're helped and sometimes they aren't. But I value what I do to the extent that's reflected by what I charge. So in the long run, I'm far less expensive because people need me far less than some of these other practice management craziness things I hear about. 2 times a week, 3 times a week for 12 weeks. Are you kidding? You know, from my point of view, either fix the problem or go home. So anyway, during the month of July, and this is for K-Talk people only, K-Talk family, their family members, because I'm not advertising this to anybody else. I will have people who come in from family referrals during the month of July that I will be charging full fees. But if you call in to make an appointment and you say, hey, I heard Dr. Jack on the radio, or I heard of from a friend of mine that catches K-Talk all the time, can I take advantage of that? You bet you can. You just tell Trudy or Hannah, whoever answers the phone, you would like that K-Talk discount. And it's through the end of July, half off. We used to do, we do something like this every Christmas where we do 2 for 1, which is half price. This is even better than that because you don't have to have 2 people there, just by yourself. The office number is 801-523-1890. And before long, Hannah or Trudy will be able to answer your phone calls and get you scheduled. Plan on 2 hours. Follow-up visits are very brief. But the initial one, because I take x-rays before I work on you, because I haven't the slightest idea what to do for you without film. What I'm trying to fix is only revealed on an x-ray. You cannot feel it. And after I work on you, and it looks like the body straightened up, you're taller, like this fellow yesterday. He's already 6'2". And after I'd worked on him, he stood up, and I could see immediately he was taller. And I said, do you feel taller? He says, yeah. What happened? Well, your spine straightened up. You didn't grow, just your spine became more vertical, and your head is sitting higher off the floor, and your left brain is sensing that, thinking it grew. Well, you didn't grow, you just straightened up. And then after I work on somebody, then I take some follow-up film to see if there's anything left in there, because I represent, what I do is getting rid of the atlas subluxation complex. In other words, I represent myself as putting that top bone back in the place where it's supposed to be, so all nerve interference stops and full nerve energy from the brain reaches every cell in the body. And I don't want somebody to go out half fixed. You can get a little bit of a good correction and feel great, but it doesn't mean it got fixed. And what I'm charging people is to fix that spine. And once it's fixed, provable on a post x-ray, you can see the changes. You can see how the head and neck have come back into alignment with one another on an x-ray. Then I will see them once a week for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a couple of times 2 weeks apart, maybe another time a month or 2 apart, and that gets 90% of everybody I've taken care of into the condition they want to be. So during the month of July, half off the initial fee, 801-523-1890. Now, there's another thing that I want to talk about, and that's this new paper that it's in Discover Mental Health, Emerging and Accumulating Safety Signals for the Use of Estrogen Among Transgender Women. Now, this transgender thing isn't over with. Even though DEI looks like it might be taking a back seat here really quickly to other federal programs. This very interesting study, and I wanted to share one of the high points of it with you, because you don't hear too much of transgender women trying to become a man as you hear of men trying to become a woman. And the male use of estrogen is associated with a range of diseases and health complications that are finally coming out in the studies. And why finally? Because it's been around long enough that they can see the damage that this is doing to these people's bodies. So in recent years, administering estrogen to males who identify as a transgender woman is one of the stepping off points for this transgender change to take place. And it's becoming increasingly common, among adolescents. And it's often paired with testosterone blockers. And this is marketed as the verbiage, the word use you hear is gender affirming care. It kind of softens it up a little bit. I am really a woman inside of a man. And that I want to affirm the fact that I was born in the wrong body, and I'm going to take steps to take care of that. So it's a term that's used to describe medical interventions intended to align a person's physical body with his or her gender identity. And I'm trying to be careful about this. But as more young people pursue medical transition, in the absence of long-term studies, the same problem we have with vaccines, there's no long-term studies, and there are no long-term studies of transgenderism. The concerns about the safety, the efficacy, the informed consent have grown more urgent, because quite often the concept of informed consent is missing when a man decides he's really a woman, or a woman wants to become a man, and they will start doing the surgeries that are required to physically represent this gender that they affirm themselves to be, not what they were born as. That's where some very serious problems begin to show up. There was a recent article in Discover Mental Health, and it was entitled Emerging and Accumulating Safety Signals for the Use of Estrogen Among Transgender Women. And it tries to fill in the gap of all the missing knowledge and research. And it's authored by Lauren Schwartz and her colleagues, trying to fill that in. And it compiles studies, case reports, group data to spotlight the range of serious health risks associated with long-term estrogen use in a man. And so understanding the risks of this cross-sex hormone therapy, there goes the news. So now I'm just talking to the streamers. Understanding the risk of this cross-sex hormone therapy. Some well-known other risks associated with long-term estrogen use in males is starting to come out. Now, one of the best-known risks associated with use in males is infertility. And you know what I think I'm going to do? I think I am going to go to countdown. Come on. I'm trying to get this stream to a point where a break. I could put in a break here. Countdown 60, 15, 18. I don't see it. Nick, I don't suppose you're listening, but I don't see the 6-minute break. All right, let me go on. I'll just go on talking to you. Well, the news should have started by now. There it is. Okay, talk. In this review, Schwartz et al. Noted that while some patients retained limited sperm production, many do not, and they exhibit testicular atrophy and fibrosis and shrinking and scarring and the kind of tissue changes that can rapidly lead to cancer. And a recent systemic review cited in the paper found that taking estrogen alongside testosterone blockers was linked to higher proportions of sperm abnormalities or azospermia, which is a complete loss of sperm. And some of these effects can be reversible, others are not. Tissue studies showing that orchiectomies, which is the surgical removal of the testicles, shows widespread damage of the tissue left behind. Now, I guess someone would have to be really, really committed to this to take these kinds of risks. But what they're finding out is not all of this information is clearly coming out in the informed consent. Informed consent is one of the pillars of modern healthcare. Yes, here's what you want to do, but here are the risks involved. You see the risks listed with commercials on TV for various drugs. As the drugs go parading across the screen for your evening entertainment when you're watching your favorite television shows, they also list all the different kinds of risks associated with that because they've got enough studies that they know what's going on. And the problem with gender affirmation surgeries is that there isn't a whole lot of data yet over a long period of time. So cardiovascular complications was another well-documented concern. Multiple studies showed reports of higher rates of dangerous blood clots known as VTEs, venous thromboembolism, and the strokes among trans-identifying males taking estrogen. So one meta-analysis found that these venous thromboembolism occurred twice as high as in non-trans identifying males. And a cohort study showed that after 2 years of estrogen use, 2 years, the risk of these embolisms was over 5 times higher after 6 years use of a man taking estrogen. The risk of ischemic stroke was nearly 10 times higher than non-trans identifying males. And this is just coming out now. So you can imagine a surgeon talking to a man who wants to start taking estrogen so he can grow breasts and have his sex organs removed so he has no evidence of his former life as a man, and be taking these drugs for, and the study said 6 years. Their chance of getting a stroke was 10 times higher than a man who remained physically a man. Now, while some research suggests that the transdermal estrogen, the patches or the creams, have a little lesser clotting risk than the oral forms, but all of them elevate the cardiovascular risk. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because you may not know somebody personally who's done this. I have patients who've done this. And they don't come to me because of their transgender situation. They come to me for the reason that other people come to me, usually pain. Now, I don't think I want to go any further into the mental end of this. It's just that when you are born with 2 X chromosomes as a woman, or XY chromosome as a man, your body has a certain genetic pattern that it is designed to follow, whether you are conscious or not, whether you're in a coma or not, whether you are completely aware of your surroundings and what's going on around you, or there's some limiting cognitive problem, you have a certain genetic pattern for physiology, both chemical and physical, to take place inside your body. And any belief that you might possess that says that you're a woman trapped in a man or a man trapped in a woman. I mean, I was a man trapped in a woman at one time, but then she gave birth and I was free. That's supposed to be funny. You have certain genetic processes that take place inside the body that require certain hormones to get the job done. So if you are a woman who wants to become a man, you still have ovaries, and these ovaries are producing hormones that are designed through your genetic structure to take care of metabolic issues inside the body. And you have larger levels of estrogen and progesterone, as well as LH and FSH, than a man might. Well, obviously you do, because it's those hormones that take a little girl and turns her into a woman. Irregardless of your belief that you are of the wrong gender, irregardless of your religious belief, your political belief, your financial practices, your living habits, these things are going on inside the body all the time. And for a man who thinks he's really a woman, his body changed from a little boy to a man because of the predominance of testosterone and the limiting amount of estrogen. Now, women, their ovaries produce testosterone. Fortunately, not dihydrotestosterone, because that's what's going to give you a beard and deep voice and everything else. But they have testosterone in their development because testosterone is important for brain development, for the heart development, for the kidneys and the livers to develop properly. Testosterone has to be in there. Men, their testicles produce estrogen, and it produces progesterone, because small amounts of those help maintain balance of testosterone. Now, as I said, if I compare somebody who seems to be cognizant of what's going on and they're trapped in the wrong body, as opposed to somebody else who, let's say, another person who feels like they're trapped in the wrong body, but they have some kind of an accident, a bad fall, a car accident, something that puts them in a coma. So their body is alive, it's functioning, but there's no longer an issue of transgenderism going on because they're not conscious. That body will still respond chemically to the way it was genetically designed. In other words, a man who thinks he should be a woman, but he still has his testicles and hasn't burdened his body with estrogen too much and goes into a coma, are they going to continue to administer these transgender drugs? No. They're going to leave them alone because they know the risk that's involved with this stuff. So you take the person who had an accident, they go into a coma, their body is going to default back to being a man without all these other drugs being introduced into the body. I'm just trying to do some baseline sexual physiology for you to understand the dangers of transgenderism drugs. A woman who, even if she has her breasts removed and she's taking estrogen-suppressing drugs and she's getting testosterone to deepen the voice and to make her more manly, suddenly has an accident and is into a coma. And they're on life-supporting equipment. And they could be in a coma for months, maybe a year or so, because there's enough insurance or money to pay for it. That body's going to default back to acting like a woman because she still has her ovaries. Now, with that having been said, for the conscious person who goes through these drug-changing chemicals to make them feel like the other sex or to make them behave to some degree like the other sex, that is where these studies come out now showing great risks of cancer if they've been on these drugs for 6 years or more, great risk of cardiovascular problems, especially ischemic stroke, if they've been on these drugs for a while, because their body is being loaded with drugs that don't belong there. Now, this paper also highlights cognitive risks, memory loss, early onset impairment of brain function. And while the shorter-term studies have consistently shown these problems, longer-term research of the older transgender identifying male taking hormones has found poor performance on tasks involving memory and processing speed. Because when they don't have testosterone, the brain is not going to work. With hormone replacement therapy, guys who are lacking the guyness that they want, and this is why I created the male pack. It's not overnight. It takes a while for these things to work, the male health pack, to make them feel like a man again, let alone perform like a man sexually, but to feel like a man. It stimulates higher levels of testosterone. And but chemically, a lot of guys will go out and get these pellets. A woman will get a pellet. A man will get a pellet for hormone replacement. And a man will get plenty of pellets. Plant-based material that's loaded with testosterone. And I have male patients who are getting these pellets because it turns them back into a man again. But one of the interesting things that they report, because I've asked them this, because I've studied this, I asked them, at what point do you know the recent implant of these pellets is working? And almost invariably, they say their brain. They feel like their brain turned back on. They can figure things out faster. Their memory returns. Their desire to get up and get something going, let alone a return of sex drive, which is probably the main reason they did it. But testosterone isn't just for sex. Estrogen isn't just to make a woman womanly. The same drug, the same hormone, not drug, the same hormone that creates a sex drive in a man is the same hormone that creates a sex drive in a woman, testosterone. So some women who've lost their sex drive will do some hormone replacement. I do not recommend the creams for testosterone. That's very dangerous. So they'll go out and get a little pellet that has a little bit of testosterone in it, and it will make a difference. Suddenly they got a sex drive again. They want to make love. But they report the same thing the guys do. Their memory improves. Greater cognizance. Now, in postmenopausal women, estrogen has always been linked to the double relative risk of dementia, an effect that appears to extend to trans-identifying males. So women who are postmenopausal, who still have their ovaries, because their ovaries are still producing estrogen, just not enough to cause ovulation to take place. A 65-year-old woman who's sexually active does not want to be ovulating. Although there are cultures around this planet where women in their 60s conceive and bear healthy babies. We don't want to do that here. And so when menopause comes, the estrogen levels start to drop, which is, then there's side effects to that. You know, the perimenopausal symptoms and the hot flashes and other things that start to take place. They don't have to. Women who have extremely good nutritional status never go through menopausal symptoms. But my point is that a lot of women, because they're producing less of these hormones, will start using hormone replacement therapy, especially estrogen. And they'll either be taking a pill or they'll be taking a patch or something. And what they have found is that postmenopausal doses of estrogen doubles the relative risk of dementia. And this is just starting to show up. Now, perhaps the most alarming finding that was in this paper of the dangers, especially with men, of the transsexual processes that are involved, especially the use of estrogen, high levels of estrogen in a man, is the risk of early death. Schwartz and colleagues who produced this paper referenced a Dutch cohort study of patients treated at a major gender identity clinic. And they found the overall mortality risk of trans-identifying men, meaning a man trying to become a woman, was higher compared to men in the general population, and was even higher compared to women in the general population. And the leading cause of early death was heart disease, cancer, and suicide. And an earlier study found that 51% of higher mortality rate in trans-identifying males than the general or the general population suffering from early death. Now, among these headline findings, which should be no surprise, the paper noticed other things showing up with trans-identifying males. Autoimmune diseases such as lupus, systemic sclerosis, life-threatening kidney complications, and a 6-fold increased risk of developing multiple sclerosis. This is what happens when you fool around with Mother Nature. Now, I'm not making a moral judgment here. I'm just looking at this scientifically with the studies that are starting to show up. You can't fool Mother Nature. You take a man and start loading him with female hormones with the idea that it'll turn him into a woman, or a woman who wants to be a man and load her up with testosterone. There's going to be a price to pay when you start playing around with the internal chemistry of the human body. So there's more to this study. I think that's enough. I think I've made my point. These are the things that, I mean, this kind of research is only now being done after literally thousands of teens have already started irreversible treatments. And the safety signals that the body will emit and demonstrate as a result of these chemical abuses is now just beginning to become detectable, because so many people have recently been exposed to these interventions without paying attention to this stuff. This should be a sobering wake-up call. This should be in the informed consent to the last degree before these kinds of changes begin to take place. I mean, before you start with the drugs before you do the surgery. Now, I mentioned this, and I don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable about what I'm talking about, but because these are questions I'm asked by patients. Okay, now my RFK update. What time is it? Oh my goodness, 20 after. Again, I want to announce a special in my clinic. The audience is constantly changing on radio. Usually if somebody listens for 20 minutes, you've got a good solid listener. The time it takes to get to work, the time it takes to get kids to school and back, whatever. Well, I am offering a half off of my initial fee for K-Talk listeners through the month of July. We usually do this at Christmas when we do a 2-for-1, where I'll see 2 people for the price of 1. This is even better because you don't need 2 people, just 1 person. As a thank you, I don't know that my practice would be as large as it is without the intervention of K-Talk in the early days, and the fact that I still see somebody from K-Talk every now and then, not nearly what it used to be, but it's a thank you. Now, what you do is you need to call the office, at least for the consultation. If you decide I'm not really what you're looking for, we'll still be friends. You can just go on your way. There won't be any charge. The The only people listening now are those of you on the stream. So they got a commercial playing, but it's the K-Talk audience that I want to hear this, hear the offer that I'm making. But the offer simply is just you call the office, 801-523-1890, and you'll talk to Trudy or you'll talk to Hannah. Tell them you'd like to take advantage of the half-off special through the month of July. And they'll get you scheduled. They'll schedule you for a consultation. Once the consultation's over, and we've decided whether we want to go further or not, then I could take you as a patient. Now, for those of you who at K-Talk who had to go through that commercial, again, I want to repeat of the special that I have at K-Talk, half off during the month of July for a new patient. Prices after that will be normal, but as a thank you, because I'm in my 31st year now at K-Talk, and I have seen over 22,000 patients since I started March of 1995, 30 years ago. And a lot of that has come from K-Talk or references. My goodness, what? Or whatever from the K-Talk audience. Now something else is slathering across the screen here at K-Talk. For those of you who discovered what I'm doing from the stream or were referred by somebody who listens to the stream, I also do a simulcast at K-Talk Radio Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday mornings. Monday and Tuesday are kind of world affairs of what's going on. Wednesday's health show, as if you've been listening today, I haven't talked too much about politics. There's enough in the healthcare world to occupy that. But I want to get back again to this offer now that I'm talking to the K-Talk crowd again. During the month of July, in celebration of the 250th anniversary of our republic that we're coming into this year, and for the practice building that I've gained from K-Talk Radio, through the month of July, and I'm only offering this to the K-Talk crowd, or anybody who calls in and says, I want to take advantage of that K-Talk offer. Half off the initial fee. That's a lot. That is a lot. Other people who will be calling in who are not a part of the K-Talk crowd, who don't really know anything about K-Talk, will not get this special. And then also our July 4th sale. It starts July 4th at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it ends July 8th at midnight. And it's online sales. And no code is needed. Just go to forbiddendoctor.com. And you can order what you need there. If you're not sure what you need, just call the office, 801-523-1890, and they can help you through this. But no code is needed. The code is automatically applied at checkout, 15% off of any of our products, including Forbidden Doctor products. And that starts this Friday morning at 8 and goes to Sunday night, or is it Monday? Maybe Monday night at midnight. All right, now I want to get to my hero, Bobby Kennedy Jr. I don't know if you saw his presentation on Tucker Carlson the other day. Holy smoke. And the conversation might startle you a little bit, maybe even infuriate you, and then lift your spirits. Because it's not every day that an active Secretary of Health and Human Services sits down for 90 minutes straight with any pundit, let alone Tucker Carlson. But that's exactly what happened. And Kennedy instantly seized Carlson's attention with a very chilling story of CDC corruption. And it wasn't COVID-19 corruption. he revealed that the CDC literally buried a 1999 internal study led by researcher Thomas Verstraeten, which showed an alarming 1,135% increase in autism risk from the hepatitis B vaccine. Kennedy said the researchers were shocked by their findings. So what did they do about it? They covered it up. This is what he's talking about on Tucker Carlson. Can you believe this? Now, we know the CDC is corrupt, and we know the FDA is corrupt, and we know the NIH is corrupt, simply because their directors are former pharmaceutical presidents or board members. And this has gone on for decades. So I'm going to repeat what Kennedy revealed. A 1999 internal study of the CDC, led by a researcher named Thomas Verstraeten, showed an alarming 1,135% increase in the risk of getting autism if you got the hepatitis B vaccine. When is the hepatitis B vaccine administered? It's the first one. After you get your little PK test and your little vitamin K shot, which you don't need at birth if your mother had a decent diet, you don't need it anyway. But it's to train the parents to get vaccines. And on the first day of life, before they even have an immune system that can develop an antibody, the standard practice in the hospital is to administer a hepatitis B vaccine. What is hepatitis B? It's a form of viral infection that causes serious damage to the liver. Hepatitis, hep meaning liver. Hepatitis B is spread by dirty needles and indiscriminate sexual partners. There's not two newborn babies that I know of that have been sharing needles or having indiscriminate sex. But that's how the disease is spread. Are parents told this in the hospital when they're being told their child's going to get a hepatitis B vaccine? Yeah, you bet they have. So Kennedy says the researchers who did this internal study were shocked by what they found. So what did they do? You know, let me ask you this question. If you were camping this coming weekend on July 4th at some place up in the Uintas, and you were having a great time with a family and you're out at night watching the stars because it's just so dark and beautiful, and hopefully there won't be much of a moon these nights, these coming weekends, so that you can enjoy the night sky. And while you're there, you and your whole family group, brothers, sisters, children, grandparents, grandkids, 30, 40 of you, you see a UFO come up out of the lake and go up into the sky and disappear. And every single one of you saw it. Would you have a family oath at this point in time for everybody to forever keep their mouth shut? Or would you run off and tell as many people as you could as soon as you saw it? No, I don't know if that's the best analogy, but when these researchers at the CDC, collating their evidence, finds out that getting a Hep B shot increases your chances of autism by 1,135%, would you swear each other to an oath? Keep your mouth shut or run out and tell the press as soon as possible? Yeah, just the opposite. They covered it up. Kennedy said they got rid of all the older children essentially and just had younger children who are too young to be diagnosed with autism. That was part of the study. Autism in the earliest stages usually doesn't show a whole lot before 2 years old. But by the time they're 2, and they have language. If there is some kind of deficit that might be interpreted somewhere in the autism spectrum, usually by 2 years old, you know it. And in this study, they got rid of all the children older than 2 because the younger ones, it's difficult to diagnose autism. So Bobby Jr. then explained the real reason why your pediatrician will kick you out of their practice for refusing vaccines. And I've talked about this endlessly before, but I want to bring it up again. There's a published article out there right now that says 50% of the revenue to most pediatricians comes from vaccines. It's all about the money. It always is. And the higher the vaccination rate inside of a pediatrician's clinic, the higher the bonuses are that they get. And that's why, and I'm quoting Kennedy, that's why your pediatrician, if you say, I want to go slow on the vaccines, will throw you out of his practice because you're now jeopardizing his bonus structure. And I have patients who have been removed from a pediatrician schedule because they question the safety of vaccines. And I have patients who have learned how to find a pediatrician who won't push you for vaccines. And how do you do that? It's very simple. You call the pediatrician's office and you talk to the nurses at the front desk. How does Dr. So-and-so feel about me wanting to go slow with vaccines with the children, or me wanting his pediatric advice for the health of my children where we don't take vaccines? And they're very honest about it, because the pediatrician who will not take you without vaccines, make sure his staff knows that, and his staff will tell you, Dr. So-and-so will not take your children as patients if they don't take vaccines. Or if you have a pediatrician who's concerned about the health of your children outside of the realm of chemistry, the staff will say, Dr. So-and-so will respect your issues or your wishes regarding vaccines. Now, to claim that the vaccine autism link has been debunked, and I've had a family member tell me that. I mentioned, because she's a nurse and her child was going to get vaccines, and I said, sweetheart, have you studied the relationship between vaccines and their detrimental effect on the central nervous? Oh, that's all been debunked, she said. And I said, honey, the debunking has been debunked. Well, to claim that the vaccine autism link has been debunked, Kennedy had a message for Anderson Cooper and Jake Tapper and anyone who constantly smugly insists that the autism vaccine relationship has been debunked. Kennedy said this: none of the vaccines given to children in the first 6 months of life have ever been studied for autism. I'm going to repeat that. None of the vaccines given to children in the first 6 months of life have ever been studied for autism. Now, if that's not true, and Kennedy said that on Tucker Carlson's show, Big Pharma would come flowing out with all of their studies. Not a peep, except Bobby Kennedy Jr. is reckless and should be removed as the Director of Health and Human Services. Now let that sink in. None of the vaccines given to children in the first 6 months have ever been studied for autism. So he went further on, revealing that the CDC actually did find a link when they studied the DTaP vaccine. But they dismissed it. Kennedy said that they claimed it didn't count because the data came from VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Effect Reporting System, the very system that the CDC uses to track vaccine injuries. The CDC said that information wasn't good enough because it came from our system that tracks vaccine injuries. So when the evidence pointed to harm, they simply claimed that their own system wasn't reliable enough and since have taken no steps to fix it. Well, the vaccine corruption, as you might imagine, did not end there. Kennedy attested that the CDC killed off a vaccine injury reporting system that actually worked because it worked too well. He said that it showed that 1 in 37 vaccines causes an injury. And Tucker, in this interview, was just stunned. Of all vaccines, he said? Yeah, Kennedy confirmed. It doesn't matter what vaccine. 1 in 37 will cause an injury. Then he explained that the CDC funded a study level of researcher Ross Lazarus, and it compared a sophisticated machine counting system to VAERS. And what did they find out? They found out, as I have reported on many health shows in the past, VAERS was failing to catch over 99% of vaccine injuries. Now I'm reading from the study. Adverse events from drugs and vaccines are common but underreported. Although 25% of ambulatory patients experience an adverse drug effect, less than 0.3% of all adverse drug events and 1 to 13% of serious events are reported to the Food and Drug Administration. Likewise, in the study, the abstract here, fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events are reported. So the new system has revealed that 2.6% of all vaccinations resulted in an injury. So what did they do? That new system that was created, almost 20 years ago, was shut down in 2010. And today, as of now, they're still using the VAERS system, even though it's completely an inadequate system. So in that report, that research report I was just reading from, here's more information. Preliminary data were collected from June 2006 through October 2009 on 715,000 patients and 1.4 million doses of 45 different vaccines were given to 376,452 individuals. Of these doses, 35,570 possible reactions, or 2.6% of the vaccines, were identified. This is an average of 890 possible events, an average of 1.3 events per clinician per month. These data were presented at the 2009 AMIA conference. Well, Kennedy didn't stop at the old vaccine scandals. He also broke down Pfizer's own COVID vaccine trial data. And what Pfizer published with all the different kinds of coding of words to kind of hide what they're saying. Pfizer gave the people these vaccines, and it showed a 23% higher death rate in the vaccinated group. This is while Pfizer is trying to get their emergency use authorization to be able to sell their drug. Their own internal study showed a 23% higher death rate in the vaccinated group. 23, that's almost 25%. That's almost 1 in 4. So suppose you were taking your child into the pediatrician's office, and there's 3 other women or parents there with their child. So there's 4 children, and all 4 of these kids are going to get the COVID vaccine. Do they tell you in advance one of these 4 children could very well have a very serious reaction to this drug? Now, in this study, Pfizer gave 21,720 people the vaccine and 21,728 the placebo. One vaccinated person died of COVID. 2 placebo recipients died. And they used this tiny difference to claim 100% effectiveness based on relative risk reduction. This is how they play with these figures. This is why I'm saying you can't trust any medical study anymore. They break down these two groups almost 50-50. This group over here got the shot, this group didn't. The group that got the vaccination, one of them died from COVID. The group that didn't get the vaccination, 2 of them died from COVID, or they died. I don't know how they died. They just died, but they didn't get the vaccine. So twice as many people died who didn't get the vaccine as did get the vaccine. So they come out and they say, aha, because only one, not 2, only one person died of COVID with the vaccine. No, one person died from the vaccine, not 2. And 2 people died without the vaccine. That means we're 100%. There's a 100% difference between those 2 numbers. That means the vaccine's 100% effective based on relative risk reduction. But in absolute terms, it took 22,000 vaccinations to save 1 life. Now, over 6 months, 21 of the vaccinated participants died of all causes, compared to 17 in the placebo group, which was a 23.5% higher death rate over 6 months of those that got the shot. Then there's the vaccine spokesperson, Paul Offit, often seen on CNN and other mainstream networks. And again, many of you know this because you've heard me talk about it endlessly. I'm going to talk about it again. I debated Paul Offit on national radio over vaccine safety. And it was on the Doug Steffen show. It was being broadcast at around 350 radio stations around the country. And I had no knowledge that this was coming. When I got on the line with Doug, they called me and said, hey, Doug's saying, hey, I've got a special guest. I want you to debate him. Well, of course, my blood runs cold. The hair goes up on the back of my neck. And I said, well, who? Oh, Paul Offit of the Philadelphia Children's Hospital. I about fell down off my feet. Because if there's anybody in this country besides Fauci that might be called Dr. Vaccine, it's Dr. Paul Offit. So I have, I think, 5 minutes to gather my exploding thoughts that I'm going to be debating Dr. Vaccine, not because I didn't feel the sanctity and the completeness of my position, but that I probably would sound like a fool and forget everything, forget every fact, every little piece of information I knew. And Offit is talking about how vaccines have saved the lives of millions and millions of children and bettered their lives and bettered America, and everything is just wonderful because of the discovery of vaccines. And then Doug says, Jack, what do you think? Not Dr. Jack. Was Dr. Offit this, Dr. Offit that? Not Dr. Jack. Jack, what do you think? Well, by this time I had gathered my thoughts, and I said, well, my problem is long-term safety studies. There aren't any. And then Offit, of course, immediately interrupts me. Oh, yeah, we have long-term safety studies. And I said, Dr. Offit, I was nice enough to call him Dr. Offit. I said, I have studied this for decades. I have looked everywhere, Medline, PubMed, things that pharmaceutical companies will release, whatever. I have yet to find a long-term study on the safetiness of these vaccines where you compare an unvaccinated child to a vaccinated child, and there are none. Now, this was This is at least 10 years ago when this happened. And he said, well, I have one. Well, I would love to see it. So by the time the interview was over with, and I just went on. I went on to say we don't have 5-year studies, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years studies comparing vaccinated to unvaccinated. And then he suggested the idea that it's unethical to do that. And I said, it's unethical to do a vaccine study? He says, yeah, because you'd have to have a control group that didn't get the vaccine, and that's unethical to have these children grow up without vaccines. And I thought, what an argument. My goodness, what an argument. Anyway, when the broadcast stopped, I gave him my email. He asked for it. He said, I'll send you a study. Well, I would like to see it. So 2 or 3 days later in my email, there's an email from Paul Offit. And so I open it up. It's a study he did of 2 weeks. And it was a vaccine he made. And it was 14 children. And after 2 weeks, these 14 children demonstrated the presence of antibodies in their bloodstream. Of course they're going to have antibodies to the vaccine. Of course they are. Just as anything else that they may have been exposed to around the time of the inoculation of that exploratory vaccine would also have built antibodies to any other antigen that showed up. And I thought, yeah. So I looked into him further. He, at that time, was the author of over 14 vaccines. And so Kennedy shared with Tucker an infuriating story about how he literally, Offit, voted himself rich on the rotavirus vaccine. Because while he was serving on the CDC's ACIP committee, ACIP, the one that Kennedy just fired every member and put new ones on there, Offit voted to add rotavirus vaccination to the childhood schedule, even though he was developing his own competing vaccine. And he guaranteed demand for his product. So the first approved rotavirus vaccine, RotaShield, was yanked from the market for causing dangerous intussusception. That's with the bowels. And Offit's vaccine, RotaTech, eventually replaced it. And then he and his partners later sold their rights of RotaTech to Merck for $186 million. And as RFK Jr. said, Offit literally voted himself rich. So when Carlson mentioned Fauci, Kennedy revealed how Fauci funded research that helped scientists hide the evidence of lab-made viruses. And the technique is called seamless litigation, which allows researchers to engineer viruses in a lab without leaving the telltale genetic fingerprints. And one of his fundees, Ralph Barrick from the University of North Carolina, you've heard of him, developed a technique called seamless litigation technique, which is a technique for hiding the laboratory origins of a manipulated virus. That was done here before that thing ever got over to Wuhan. Normally, he said, if there's a virus manipulated, researchers can look at the DNA sequences and they can say this thing was created in a lab. Ralph Barrick had developed a technique that he had called the no-see technique, and its technical name was seamless litigation, and it was a way of hiding evidence of human tampering. And he called it the exact opposite of what real public health work should be. And then Carlson cut in saying, that's what you would do if you're creating a virus for biological warfare. Then the conversation shifted to Trump, leading one of the biggest highlights of the entire interview. First, Kennedy explained that Trump chose his cabinet in a very unorthodox way. He wanted to see 3 clips of each candidate performing on TV before considering them for the job. Now, For a businessman, I can understand that. Isn't that part of the process of sorting through possible hirees for a job position that's an important position in your corporation? You don't want to just sit down with a clipboard and ask them some questions. You want to see them performing. You want to see how they hold up against the crowd, how they integrate, how they associate, how they become a part of the dynamic, as opposed to a wallflower. So he said that Trump chose his cabinet seeing how they perform on TV. He said one of the things with President Trump is that he really knows how to pick talent. For every one of the positions that he picked, he wanted to see 3 clips of them performing on TV. He's very conscious of the fact that these people are going to be outselling his program to the public. And that's when Kennedy entered the interview with a bang, sharing his genuine thoughts about Trump for 3 straight minutes. And it was one of the standout moments of the entire conversation. He said, if you're on the fence about Trump, remember this. He said, I had him pegged as a narcissist, when narcissists are incapable of empathy. And he's one of the most empathetic people I've ever met. He's immensely curious, he's inquisitive, and immensely knowledgeable. He's encyclopedic in certain areas you wouldn't expect. Kennedy added that Trump genuinely cares about the soldiers who go to war, citing how Trump always talks about the casualties on both sides, using the Russian-Ukrainian conflict as an example. And he says whether it's vaccines or Medicaid or Medicare, he's always thinking about this impacts the little guy. And the Democrats have pegged him as a guy who's sort of sitting in the cabinet meeting talking about how we can make billionaires richer. He's the exact opposite of that. He's a genuine populist, Kennedy said. So there's an awful lot more to that conversation, but it might have some effect if you are effectually changed on how you feel about vaccines and autism. But it's at tuckercarlson.com, and the interview with Bobby Kennedy Jr. at 90 minutes long. And it's just, as I said, I voted for Trump, considering the alternative. I wasn't completely sold on him. And I voted him because he was going to end all the wars and not start any new ones, which, of course, has gone out the window. So I'm not too wild or happy about that. I still think he's got a Trump up his Trump sleeve that hasn't been played yet, but that's to come. But Bobby Kennedy, and I think Kash Patel's still pretty clean. I'm worried about Tulsi Gabbard. I think she's sold out. But Bobby Kennedy, as long as he's in this position, no wonder Big Pharma wants to crucify this man. All right. That's to lead up to the end of the program here. I want to remind you once again, I do have a Jack's Vacation Pack. It's a combination pack for maintaining immune strength while you're traveling, as well as protection from the sun. Most people who go on vacations during the summer aren't going to get out of the sun, they're going into it. So it's Jack's Vacation Pack, Dr. Jack's Vacation Pack. It has Imuplex that you would take maybe 2 or 3 of them a day to maintain immune strength when you're around all these other strange bugs. And then Cataplex F and calcium lactate to make sure your body's refrigeration system is working well. And USF ointment in case of sunburn. Jack's Vacation Pack. And then again, the special on NUCCA. NUCCA, N-U-C-C-A, stands for National Upper Cervical, meaning the Upper Neck Chiropractic Association. It's been around for a long time, tons and tons of published research regarding the work I do. I'm offering half off the initial fee to the K-Talk audience during the month of July. That's more than 4 weeks now, to July 31st. You just call the office, 801-523-1890, and they'll get you scheduled for a consultation. And if through the consultation you decide this isn't what you want to do, we'll still be friends. You can go on your way, and I'll go on my way. But if it's what you want, you can save a lot of money on your initial visit because I'm cutting it in half. And it's not 2 for 1. It's 1 for 1. That's even better than 2 for 1. half off my initial charge. Now, people who are not associated with K-Talk, people who will be calling in because of family references, I'm not telling them this. This is just a special thank you to a private audience who built my practice for me. Well, I kind of built it too, but the referrals that I got from my K-Talk listeners. And many of them have become family. Many. Remember Rhonda Lee? People like that. And Kay Henry, and just all the way back to the very beginning. Some of you, those names mean something because you've been around, some of you have been around longer than I have, but I'm in my 31st year now broadcasting through K-Talk. And so that is a savings of quite a bit of money. And it'll be good through the end of July. Half off the first visit expenses. And the first visit includes a consultation, exam to determine whether or not I think I can help you. If I can, it includes x-rays. The adjustment that is done based on those x-rays, and then follow-up x-rays to make sure that the adjustment is in fact done. And then your first follow-up visit after that is at no charge. That's the full package. I'm cutting the price in half. So it includes the correction, everything that's involved with the first visit, plus a free follow-up after that. That takes 3 or 4 or 5 days later. That's good till the end of the month. You call 801-523-1890. Now, I know someone's going to say, well, I've got this friend or this family member. They don't really listen to K-Talk. Can they get that? Yeah, because of you. Because you listen to K-Talk. They don't have to be people who listen to this radio show every morning. They just have to come in through a K-Talk reference. So that's what they need to say. When the phone's answered, I'd like to take advantage of Dr. Jack's K-Talk special. That's all they have to say. Then I know somehow they heard it through K-Talk. All right, I think we're going to go to news. This will be on the stream. This entire show is on the stream at youtube.com/drjackstockwell. And it should be up pretty quick after the program's over with. If you want to refer. Whoops, there it goes. All right, K-Talk. I love you guys. I'll talk to you next week. And for those of you on the stream, that will do it for today. I hope I covered some subjects you found interesting. I had fun. I have fun doing this. It really is a lot of fun. And I will see you all